Welcome to Mommy Heal Thyself. We feature guests who provide you with the tools, resources, and strategies you need to say no to a life of pain and suffering from all forms of preventable disease, toxic drugs, and unnecessary surgeries. We hope to inspire you to boldly reclaim your ability to heal and to serve the ones you love. Welcome, ladies, to another episode of Mommy Heal Thyself. And I have with me a fantastic guest that we're going to be talking about resilience in our children, especially those of you that have special children, right? And so we have with us today our guest, Barbara Gustavson, and she is a mental and brain health advocate and leadership facilitator. She provides stress management and burnout prevention training for mental health workers and community leaders. She utilizes strength-based approach to support resilience initiatives, and she's the author of Permission to Be Bold. She's also the head facilitator at Dr. Amen's certification program for coaches and educators. That is actually how I was wonderfully blessed to be able to meet Barbara. So, hey, Barbara, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Dr. Gamble. I'm so excited you asked me to join. The more I get to know you, I just want to hear about what you're doing. And so thank you for having me.
Well, this is a very, very important area for me because some of our audience may remember that I've shared with you some of the challenges that I've had with my children. My daughter, who had several different mental health diagnoses, and then more recently, my son, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And the Amen Clinic was a blessing to the point where now, after applying the things that I learned through my training as a certification practitioner with the Amen Clinic, my son has recently gotten licensure as an aviation mechanic. It is like night and day. When I remember those months of just crying in my pillow, just not knowing what to do. And the Amen Clinic was a beacon of light. So, Barbara, tell us a little bit more about what is it that you do? What type of families and moms are you encountering? What is some of the major challenges that they're dealing with right now?
Yes. First of all, your face just lit up when you shared about your son, and my mama heart is just so happy for you both. Um, yeah. So this is really one of the first times I'm sharing a little bit about my journey, with my family, my children. My two boys are older now, but when it comes to supporting families and mothers, what I'm really noticing is a lot of them, they're helping so much and they're helping solve problems, but they're really having this, I kind of call it an inner tug of war.
Mm,
Like their heart is being pulled in so many directions. And there's the part of their heart that is wanting to heal their
mm,
families, but there's this other part inside, this space in their heart. They're wanting to create, they're wanting to have a space outside what's happening just for them. So
mhm,
there's this inner tug of war. And it's a war that I've had for many, many years as I've navigated a journey with both of my boys who have some special needs. There's this part of me that wanted something outside of what was happening just to put that spark in my life again.
mm,
And now that I look back, that inner tug of war, it was like pulling my heart apart. But over time, I realize it's pulling myself together. They're
mm,
not separate parts of my heart, but it's just really navigating how to bring those parts together so there isn't that inner war inside of us going on. So as I'm listening to moms, to parents, and seeing where their heart really is,
mhm,
for them to imagine there's actually more to life than what they're seeing. Sometimes we're so up close to what's happening and
mhm,
we're so into the research of finding solutions for our loved ones. We forget to know, what even something simple as, how to savor little moments. Cause I've
mm,
found myself and I'm here to tell you I didn't navigate the journey as well as I wanted to, and when my kids were younger. But looking back, I can really look at myself with grace and realize I was doing the best I could, with what I had at the time, but really knowing how to empower myself through that process. Um, and being able to encourage and point people to resources. There is a way to thrive in this journey.
Hmm.
Sometimes you are in survival mode, but there are moments that you can learn to savor and begin to envision and be able to thrive during that.
So now, what are some of the things that you find that these special moms that have special children tend to do that bite them in the butt? Let's put it that way. That kind
Ooh,
of compromise their ability to thrive and to be resilient.
probably several things.
Hmm.
And I'm going to share, and I'm again, this first time I'm really sharing, so I'm kind of reflecting as I share.
Yeah.
One of the things, like us mothers and parents, not just mothers, but especially mothers, we're very nurturing. We
Mm-hmm.
love to help.
Mm-hmm.
I am an over helper. Like I am a self-proclaimed, I am an over helper, overly responsible mother, and I love helping. And I tended to get in this mentality I had to save my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of this mentality, I have to save the world and,
Right.
go in and solve everything. And I really got caught in over helping, over giving, overdoing it, that I forgot to savor. And so I had to really look at, where are my boundaries? Not just boundaries with others, but where am I overstepping the line? And that's really hard to do. And looking at who can I bring in to support me. Support
Mm-hmm.
system was huge. I didn't at certain points of my children's childhood, I had doctors, specialists, there was a support system, but I did not have mentors or someone who had walked that journey ahead of me to guide me through this. And I found, for me personally, I tended to suffer in silence,
Mm-hmm.
feeling alone. Like
Mm-hmm.
both of my boys, my oldest son, he has mild cerebral palsy on one side. And so our world was going to doctors, PTOTs, all the whole gamut.
Mm-hmm.
And my youngest son, who's on the spectrum, very high functioning, um, his world was challenging too, just because he was deeply feeling his nervous system, just all the sensory processing was overwhelming. I tended to feel that with him, and I found myself in a place where I was suffering alongside him.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I wasn't aware that I was struggling myself. I had some brain health issues I wasn't aware of. I found out in my 40s I had suffered a head injury. In my teens, it wasn't until they saw it in a scan, but I realized there was things about me that made that journey harder in supporting my kids.
Wow, there is so much there to unpack.
I know.
As you were telling your story, it reminds me of a terminology that I use for just that type of woman. I say we tend to be Atlas caregivers. The image of
Mhm.
Atlas carrying the world on his shoulder, and we want to
Ooh.
take everybody's problems and make them our own. And the other thing that came to me as you were telling your story is that I resonated with that because that is exactly what happened to me when I had those issues with my children. I started to isolate, and part of it was I felt ashamed. I felt like I wasn't measuring up as a mom, that I should know how to do something better than this, right? And I started to isolate. And so that's why I keep on encouraging women to reach out to us here at It Takes a Village so that you can become part of a sister circle. God never intended us to do this journey alone. So now, Barbara, tell us a little bit more about some of the things that you've learned through the Amen Clinic and how these things are able to help these types of women to navigate that particular issue?
Yes, I love this question because there's so much available, to help people navigate. What it really like for me, it came to I had to really know myself. That Socrates quote, know thyself. Very simple. For
Mhm.
me, that included brain health, know my brain,
Mhm.
know
Mhm.
my nervous system.
Yeah.
I had to really embark on a journey of understanding me, where I was at.
Mm.
I was fortunate enough to have the SPECT scan on my brain to really know what was happening. And
Mm.
it really helped me navigate the resources I needed to go through for my own brain rehabilitation.
Mhm.
And then from there, I could apply what I learned to help understanding my kids' brains.
Mhm.
My oldest, even, and you're familiar with the brain types,
Yeah.
um, and to see how, even though there's different types, we're all unique. There are no two
Mhm.
brains alike.
Mhm.
Um, so looking at, okay, what are my children exhibiting? Like what are my children, high anxious, worrying thoughts? What
Mhm.
is he doing? But what might be happening to cause that? And so
Mhm.
asking questions to get curious. And as you know, Dr. Campbell, so many things can cause anxiety.
Yeah.
So many things like even my own anxiety, there's so many things that can trigger that, but really understanding from a brain functioning
Mhm.
level what's happening, um, some of the strategies that can be used, some
Mhm.
of the supplementation that can support that. So
Mhm.
for me, it was really looking at it from a high level, but
Mhm.
then also targeting in on some of the challenges that we're having.
I love what you're saying because part of the reason why we named the podcast Mommy Heal Thyself is that what I've noticed as a common theme as I work with these families is that as you start to quote unquote fix your child, the irony is that you start to learn certain things that help you to heal yourself. And part of healing your child is actually healing yourself first. And I love to see that that's part of your journey. Now, can you tell us a little bit more for those of our audience who are not familiar with this? What are some of the brain types that can be identified?
Yeah, so the very first one is a balanced brain type, and it took thousands of images for them to find what they felt was a quote unquote normal brain. And because there's no two brains alike, there's
Mm,
nothing really normal. But what they did find is if the four key areas, the four key systems of the brain, are functioning like they're supposed to, that is a balanced brain. And they all work differently.
mm.
Um, Persistent brain type. And you can
Oh, wait,
see that,
1 second. What are the
excuse me.
four different parts of the brain?
Oh, yeah. So you have the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part.
Mhm.
Think of that as your supervisor, your boss, your personal assistant, whatever word you want. That's kind of running the gamut. Like that's where
Mm,
you make your decisions.
okay.
That's where your organization comes from. That's where empathy lives, your relationships. So there's a lot of executive, things happening, the task oriented stuff. And then you have the limbic system, our
Mhm.
emotions. That is where, our happiness, our joy, our fears, our doubt kick in. And when they're running too active, you don't want it too high. It takes
Mhm.
over. It basically takes your
Mhm.
supervisor offline. They're like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll check
Yeah.
out. You feel. And then the cingulate gyrus, that is your brake pedal. So think about, you're driving your car. And I remember when I was learning how to drive, it was like I was hitting the brake pedal like every 5 seconds and you're getting whiplashed. For some people, that can get really stuck. It can get overactive.
Mhm.
And then your basal ganglia. That's where motivation is. That works great with the prefrontal cortex when
Huh.
it's balanced. And there's integral other parts of it, but those are the four key main areas.
Okay. So now let's talk about those brain types that you were going into.
Yes. So the balance, that's when there is good, symmetrical, even flow throughout. You tend to kind of roll with things. It doesn't mean that you don't have bad days or you're not impacted, but you seem to relatively come out that pretty quickly. It's where a lot of brain resilience, you
Mhm,
can take an impact
mhm,
and you can come through it. And um, then spontaneous types. So think of those risk takers. They love to be spontaneous. They're
right.
quite impulsive
Mhm,
and super creative. I mean, everyone has a creativity part, but just a wealth of creativity. And for each of the types, there's strengths and there can be vulnerabilities and
mhm,
then persistence, like
mhm,
digging hills like this, but also at times, um, predicting the worst.
mhm,
It's just like I have a combination. There's 16 different combinations of those types. But I have a plan. I don't just go with the flow, but I have to have a good backup plan.
mhm,
And the anxious types, and they're more sensitive. They're deeply, deeply feeling, and the cautious types as well. So you have these brain types, and they can fluctuate.
mhm,
So if I could just share, when I first started on this journey, I was brain type 8
mhm.
and I was ready for anything. And it really made sense because my nervous system tended to be on high alert.
Huh.
So I was very, very, um, just hypo aroused,
Uh-huh.
and once I started doing certain things, I got to brain type 1. And it honestly took about 3 years. I was like, yes, I did all this hard work. And then I had COVID. I went to brain
Mhm.
type 11. It was a different
Wow.
world for me. And I did work and I went down to a brain type 3. And I lost my dad early this year and I went to a brain type 8. So
Wow.
this shows that we can fluctuate. There's times that our brain is more vulnerable than others, and
Mhm,
grief for some reason has hit a little bit differently and harder with other griefs. But
mhm.
I respect my brain, what I'm going through, but I also use this tool to really see where I need to shift in some things that I've been doing.
So I love what you're saying, because sometimes we feel like, "Ugh, why bother? This is just the way I am, or
Mhm.
this is my genetics, or something like that." But from what I'm hearing from you, this idea of brain type is more of a tool to give you some direction as to what you can change and how you can change those things to be more specific. Is that right?
Absolutely. A friend of mine, actually, she's a mentor. He says it's a tool, not a rule. It's something that can help guide you. You'll find other resources.
Mhm,
For me personally, I've found it's one of the most helpful tools because I can take it at any time. And of course, being affiliated with Amen Clinics certainly helps because they have a lot of resources. And often I'm going to amenclinics.com and
mhm.
going through their blogs because their blogs are filled with
Yeah.
studies, recent research on new thoughts and new strategies to support people as they're going through different seasons.
So that actually brings us to talking about some of the resources because not only do you have the Amen Clinic website, but you also have the YouTube channel where I am
Yes.
very tickled that Dr. Amen, as old as he is now starting to get savvy with social
Oh
media.
my goodness. He's
And
on
doing all
TikTok.
these
I'm
videos.
not even on TikTok. He's on there like where like he's the business man on the planet. Where does he find time to
I
do this?
know, he is just so cute to me, and he just seems so down to earth, I've never
Yes.
personally met him, but he just seems that way. And then the other resource that we're gonna have all of these links for you guys in the show notes. The wonderful resource that she's referring to is the brain type assessment. And there's a free version. And then if you really want to get deep in the weeds and go down that rabbit hole, I encourage you to go to the Amen Clinic website so that you can get connected to practitioners that can do a much more comprehensive assessment with you in terms of the brain health survey. But also, you can, if need be, look into getting a SPECT scan. So now, actually talking about the SPECT scan, what would be an indication of the need to get a SPECT scan? Because I mean, it's kind of pricey.
It
So
is very pricey, and it's honestly not everyone is able to get it, have the resources to do that.
mhm,
What would be the need? Like if someone has a known condition or is really concerned for a loved one or themselves, that they feel like their brain is struggling in some way, that is certainly a reason to have one. And honestly, most people going through the clinic, they usually are having a brain challenge. Some
mm,
people decide to go just to get an assessment to see where their brain
mhm,
is at because they want to take preventative measures. They really want to protect the health of their brain now, even before they have symptoms later on in life. So it really depends what they have going on. For me, my family has a history of Huntington's disease, which is a genetic brain disorder. I lost my father and my sister to that,
mm,
and it terrified me. I didn't want to put my head in the sand. And knowing that there is a 50% chance that I could pass it on to my children, I really
mm,
wanted to rule that out and with other tests. So I decided became a brain warrior for my family. I really wanted to change my legacy. There's a lot of stuff
mhm,
that run in my family. And I just was tired of the shame of some of the stories that have been passed on. And I wanted to be able to give my children and my children's children one day an opportunity to really just go in the direction and have a legacy that they knew that they could thrive in, but also be very aware of certain things that do run in our family.
yeah. That is so key, because as I said with my story with my son, what pushed me in that direction of just saying, look, I'm getting this. I don't care how. And luckily I was able to get financing for that through the Amen Clinic. But I knew I didn't want to take any chances. I didn't want to play the guessing game. My son's brain was too precious and things had gotten to a significant crisis. And I was also aware that there were certain people in my family that have quote unquote mental health issues. So I was done with the guessing.
Yeah.
And perhaps some
Mhm.
of you out there are saying, I've been struggling with this for so long and it's not getting any better. And I'm telling you, it means the world. When I was able to show my son the actual scan of his brain, where you can actually see things as opposed to just this guessing game or somebody's checklist or, well, I think it's this, I think it's that. There was none of that. When he was able to actually see the scan, it was that aha moment. Have you had that experience too,
Oh
Barb?
my goodness. Yeah. So my scan was back in 2017. And I had picked up the book Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. I
Mm-hmm.
had tried all kinds of things, but I was struggling with depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and just some things I couldn't explain. And when I read that book, it resonated on so
Yeah.
many levels. And I read about something called EMDR, to release some childhood memory. And I'm like, ooh, that really resonates with me. And then I read about the scan, and so I decided I just wanted to see for myself because I had been down the road of so many specialists to find help and
Yeah.
spent a lot of money, and knowing, this was a big chunk of change. It wasn't,
Mhm,
change, but
mhm.
I'm like, you know what? I'm going to find a way to do it. And
Yeah,
sometimes when you want something bad enough or when you've hit rock bottom enough, you figure out a way.
yeah.
So I did, and I saw pictures, and at first it freaked me out a little bit, but they were so good in showing me what was going well. Because sometimes you leave the doctor and all you hear about is what's wrong.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I felt like I had hope, but it showed me there was a baseball diamond pattern, which you are familiar with. It
Mhm.
showed that there was some trauma that was existing in my brain. It showed areas of 3 mild injuries, which
Hmm.
explain learning disabilities that I had
Aha
growing up.
moment.
It explained the ringing in my ears. It
Wow.
explained so much. And for me to be able to have an answer to what was going on was really helpful. But then staying committed to my brain rehabilitation, the neurofeedback training, the supplementation, and the therapy and stuff. So it was so empowering over time. It wasn't easy, but it just flipped. It gave myself compassion for myself. I tend
Yeah.
to, and I think many women tend to be harder to themselves. Just,
Yeah.
in lieu of all the amazing things they're doing, we still
Mhm.
are hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
And it gave me, I was like, wow, I've done pretty good with all that going on in my head.
Yeah. I love this because unfortunately there's such a stigma with regard to quote unquote mental illness. And I think it's because the way in which the industry has gone about it is that it's this woo woo nonsense where it's like somebody playing this guessing game and spinning a
Mhm.
roulette thing and saying, oh, well, I think it's this, I think it's this. And I loved when I heard Dr. Amen say that, this is the only field where people don't test the organ that they're quote unquote treating. We're doing all of this crazy stuff with medications, and we have no idea of actually what's going on in the physical organ. So, as you said, this was a game changer. And the beauty that I hear from you is also that you're not locked into that diagnosis. You're not hexed by, like, oh my God, you're going to be a type blah blah for the rest of your life, and there's nothing you can do about it except take these medications. So I
Yes.
am just so invigorated and excited when I hear that our mommies can heal themselves. You don't have to
Yes.
suffer. Ah, so
Yeah.
as
We are more, yes.
as we wrap up, what is the one thing that comes to your mind that you really want to impress upon our ladies?
It's a message they've heard before many times.
Mhm.
Prioritize you.
Mm,
Self care is smart care.
mm,
Yes, the oxygen mask scene is great, but we tend to think this is self care is a time in a crisis.
mm, mm,
When we make self care a habit now, even when we do well, we're going to be more resilient during the crisis. Don't wait for a crisis to happen to put your oxygen mask on. That's something that I wish I had told myself, or I wish someone had told me, is don't wait until you can't do anymore or don't have more energy. Make self-care part of your daily regimen. I remember Dr. Amen saying at the very beginning of 2020, mental hygiene is just as important as washing your hands.
mm,
I also believe self care hygiene is just as important. Spiritual hygiene is just as important. Emotional hygiene is just as important as washing your hands.
mm,
For me and my brain, I have to hear something differently. I have to hear it from someone else for me to shift my thinking. And
mm,
so I've had to relanguage and use different words. Otherwise, I'm not going to take self care seriously. It's
mm.
going to be another thing on my to do list. And honestly, I avoid that. Like, let's be honest. We know we want to do our to do list, but those are the things we avoid. And when we avoid something, we create a resistance and our brain comes up with an excuse not to do it.
Mhm.
Make
I
self care fun. Yeah.
I love that message, and I love everything that you've shared with us. Ladies, what Barbara has also shared with us is that self-care is not separate from caring from the ones that you love. In fact, that self-care is integral part of caring for the ones that you love. And as you pull those two things together, realize that they are one and the same. As you love and care for yourself and your brain, you are loving and caring for the brains of everyone in your home. Well, I
I love that.
love having fun with you, Barbara. And ladies, until next time, peace and blessings.
Thank you for tuning in for this episode of Mommy Heal Thyself. If you like what we're doing here, please share, subscribe, like us, and leave a comment. Your feedback is very